television station.
Direct from our newsroom in New York, this is the CBS Evening News with Harry Reisner, substituting for Walter Cronkite, and Robert Pierpoint in New Orleans, Bruce Morton in Washington, Bill Stout in Berkeley, California, Roger Mudd in Washington, John Lawrence in New York, and Josh Darsa in Cleveland.
Good evening. In an apparent rebuke to his vice president and the Democratic Party's choice to succeed him, President Johnson today declared that no man can predict when American troops will be brought home from Vietnam. The president spoke to the American Legion's annual convention in New Orleans, and the war was his major topic. Robert Pierpoint has the story.
For the hardline American Legionnaires, it was the hardline kind of speech they wanted to hear. President Johnson said the United States does not wish to invade North Vietnam, will not pull out, so is left with a third alternative for protecting American troops, continuing the bombing.
Now, if we can't take our men in, and we're not going to take our men out, it appears to me, third, that the best thing we can do is to bring our planes to bear in the panhandle across the line against the artillery and the trucks and the rocket launchers that are being fired on our men.
Yesterday, Vice President Humphrey predicted American troops could begin to come home next year. Apparently, President Johnson does not agree.
We yearn for the day when the violence subsides. We yearn for the day when our men can come home. No man can predict when that day will come, because we are there to bring an honorable, to bring a stable peace to Southeast Asia. And no less will justify the sacrifices that our men have died for.
As others before him, Vice President Humphrey is learning that predictions on Vietnam, like disagreeing with the president, can be dangerous. Robert Pierpoint, CBS News, New Orleans.
Today, Humphrey appealed for the support of Senator Eugene McCarthy, the rival who had based his candidacy on the issue of Vietnam. Humphrey conceded that McCarthy would have difficulty in giving that support. But the vice president pointed out that the choice is among himself, Richard Nixon, and George Wallace, and Humphrey said he couldn't believe McCarthy would choose Nixon or Wallace.
$6,000, $8,000, maybe more. That's what it takes to keep up with the competition. That's what college costs. What's the best kind of life insurance to have? A John Hancock man won't have any snap answers. We have so many different plans and options, he'll sit down with you and figure out exactly what you do need. Maybe it's a plan that keeps you covered even if you borrow on it for college expenses. Or maybe it's our new plan that lets you buy a modest amount of insurance now, but guarantees that you can get more later, regardless of your health. If anybody in this life insurance business can design the right plan for you, it's probably us.
John Hancock, huh?
In today's New Orleans speech, President Johnson left it to inference that he was replying to Humphrey's troop withdrawal prediction. But the Republican vice presidential candidate, Maryland's Governor Spiro Agnew, also replied to Humphrey at a Washington news conference, and Agnew made it clear he meant Humphrey. Bruce Morton reports. Some problems with the story on Spiro Agnew. We'll get back to that later. Governor Nelson Rockefeller today named New York Republican Congressman Charles Goodell to the Senate seat of the late Robert Kennedy. That term expires in January 1971. Goodell, who's 41, has been in Congress for 9 years, is regarded as one of the party's bright young stars.
I've been to the doctor, and I now know that I do have arthritis. When I get some pain there, I take a couple Bufferin, and I get some fast relief. Certainly, coaching a college baseball team, I get a lot of physical exercise. I suffer a little bit for it. I have complete confidence when I take Bufferin that I'll get relief, and I do.
If you hurt from the minor pain of arthritis, remember, Bufferin can help.
As we said before, President Johnson left it to inference today that he meant Hubert Humphrey when he talked about predictions on troop withdrawals. But the Republicans' vice presidential candidate, Spiro Agnew, also replied to Humphrey at a Washington news conference, and Agnew made it clear he meant Humphrey. Bruce Morton reports.
Governor Agnew, smarting from what he called Humphrey's efforts to pin a Vietnam hardliners label on the Nixon-Agnew ticket, launched the sharpest personal attack of the 1968 campaign at Humphrey. His forum was a news conference following a weekly lunch with Republican senators.
He offers some alternatives to the present political and economic course in Vietnam, but we certainly aren't going to be squishy soft on the things that this administration has been soft on the fight against crime, fight against inflation, and on discerning who our friends and our enemies are. Mr. Nixon is trying to cast himself into the role of a Neville Chamberlain. And this sort of Mr. Humphrey. Mr. Nixon, of course, would play the opposite role, that of Winston Churchill.
What do you mean Neville Chamberlain?
Peace at any price. It seems to me that what he's trying to do is to recapture some of the people in his party that were dissatisfied with what happened at that convention. And I think he believes he can recapture those people without losing other people in his party. And I think the differences are so irreconcilable that he can't do this. I think he's pretty malleable. I think that last statement would indicate a degree of malleability that would have been hard to anticipate at the convention.
Reporters asked why Agnew had picked today to take the gloves off against Vice President Humphrey.
I guess by nature I'm a counterpuncher. You can't hit my team in the groin and expect me to stand here and smile about it.
Kennedy's settlement was worked out today in New York City's two-day-old teachers' strike. Officials expressed hope that regular classes for the city's more than 1 million public school students might begin tomorrow. 4 years ago, Berkeley, California, with a population of more than 100,000, desegregated its junior and senior high schools. Today, after 9 months of preparation, the city's public schools were fully integrated when de facto segregation was ended in the lower grades. Bill Stout reports.
Those politicians who have made Berkeley a synonym for unrest and uproar might find this hard to believe. The start of the most ambitious school integration program in the country, all of it orderly, without incident. Berkeley officials call it the first thorough integration on any significant scale. 25 buses at a cost of $204,000 a year to carry 3,500 children a day. 1,400 Negroes ride from the flatlands to schools in the hills. 2,100 whites bus down to the ghetto. Instead of schools ranging up to 90% all black or all white, Berkeley now has 35 to 45% Negro in every school. Whites 50% or better, the others mostly Oriental. By the end of 6th grade, most Berkeley children will have spent half their classroom time outside their home neighborhoods. The reaction of most parents was favorable, including Charles Harlan's, who moved into the hills and now sees his children being bused to the schools below.
We live where we live for housing, more or less. We captured by the view. And as a result, you know, our kids were somewhat of a minority in school, and this gives them a good opportunity every day to get not only involved with other black kids like themselves, but the total of what is Berkeley and what ultimately is the American society.
A mixture.
A good mixture. And therefore, these kids, my kids, won't grow up like I did, in isolation, or like some of the other white kids did, in isolation.
I think that the first day of school is always a little confusing, and by the end of the week, I think the mothers and the children are more settled, and then I could answer that question much more sensibly.
What are you concerned about? The mechanics of it, transportation, that kind of thing, or the idea of integration?
The idea of integration, definitely. I think it's a wonderful idea, but I'm just a little bit dubious to see how it works out.
Well, I think we're a multi-ethnic, multi-racial society, and we have to learn to live with each other. It is much more important that youngsters, perhaps on 1st grade level, be reading on a 6th grade level. And we all have to learn to exist with each other. And I think the way to do it is to get them early when they're young in schools, and hopefully we'll learn how to resist. Because if we don't learn how to resist, we're going to blow up together.
Midway through the first day, a briefing by School Superintendent Neil Sullivan.
14 years after the Brown decision in the United States, 14 years after Chief Justice Warren and the Supreme Court handed down its decision, one American city is finally doing it the right way. We have boards of education coming in as observers. I can further report to you that the Berkeley plan is going to be imitated in many parts of the country, and the first city to follow the plan will be Galveston, Texas.
School Superintendent Neil Sullivan has said the issue is simply how far the community is willing to commit itself to the task of preparing all young people for full citizenship in a democratic society. Bill Stout, CBS News, Berkeley, California.
Secretary of State Russ said today that North Korea is demanding more than just an official apology as the price for releasing the USS Pueblo and its crewmen. He indicated North Korea also wants a promise that American ships will stay out of the Sea of Japan. As for the apology, the State Department said earlier that there's no justification for giving one. A spokesman said that the seizure of the Pueblo was clearly an illegal act by the North Koreans. Air and ground action in Vietnam have dropped off as a result of a typhoon, which produced more than 10 inches of rain. But there was more terrorist activity today. 3 members of the Viet Cong broke into a Saigon school and shot up a faculty dining room. 1 teacher was killed and 3 were wounded. There was a new exchange of gunfire between Egyptian and Israeli troops along the Suez Canal today, and Israel warned the UN Security Council that unless it takes urgent measures, there's going to be another outbreak of large-scale fighting in the Middle East. It charged that the Egyptians already have built up the heaviest concentration of artillery ever seen in the area. The premier of Czechoslovakia, Oldrich Černík, flew to Moscow today and signed an economic agreement under which the Soviet Union will build a natural gas pipeline to Czechoslovakia. In return, the Czech leader agreed to a trade pact that will keep his country's economy dependent upon the Soviet bloc. And in Prague, officials said they are going to pass some new unpopular laws, which, among other things, will bring about the reactivation of the secret police. The measures will represent another concession the Czech leadership is making to Soviet occupation forces.
Marlboro country is everywhere, anywhere in the land, from east to west, north to south, from the lakes to the Rio Grande. From Manhattan towers to towering pines, a Marlboro legend grew. Till today, it's the brand that won the West and the rest of the country, too. Come to where the flavor is. Come to Marlboro country.
The electro-coated Persona gives such a smooth, comfortable shave. Why shouldn't injector users have a smooth, comfortable shave, too? Introducing the electro-coated injector blade.
The Senate Judiciary Committee today asked Abe Fortas to return for more questioning concerning his nomination to be Chief Justice of the United States. The Senate was in recess so that nothing could interfere with the committee's meeting to act on the stalled nomination. But the committee reached only tentative agreement to reopen the hearings and then itself recessed. Senator Edward Kennedy attended the committee meeting, his first participation in the legislative process since the assassination of his brother Robert. The House Commerce Committee resumes consideration tomorrow of the measure to permit televised presidential debates in this campaign. The resolution, which had been bottled up in the committee, would temporarily suspend the equal time section of the Federal Communications Act. Roger Mudd reports on its prospects.
No one on the 33-man House Commerce Committee is now willing to predict another great debate. The suspension of the equal time provision is so tied up in the politics of television and in the politics of politics that even advocates of a Humphrey-Nixon debate are admitting defeat. Lionel Van Deerling, Democrat of California, a former TV newsman.
I'd say we probably lose this by half a dozen votes.
And that ends it for another 4 years.
That's it for 1968, and it's a great pity. It's understandable that you'd never have presidential debates with an incumbent president. but you sure ought to be able to have them with two non-incumbents seeking the presidency. This added 8 million voters, it's estimated, to the total electorate that participated in 1960. It could do the same again this year.
Leading the fight against another TV debate is Democrat John Moss of California.
The real objective is not just to suspend 315 for the campaign of 1968. The real objective is to repeal 315 for all campaigns in the future. And this would permit the most rampant type of partisan discrimination in the broadcast industry. And that's an industry different than the press, because it occupies a very valuable public resource.
In addition, some older members of the committee fear that if equal time is repealed for local TV stations, every young telegenic politician who ever thought about running would come roaring down to the studios for a TV confrontation with the aging incumbent. There is also some fear that unless George Wallace is included in the debate, the public protest will be damaging back home. The networks have assured Congress Wallace will get comparable but separate time. And the Humphrey-Nixon people are adamant. No George Wallace in their debate. Since the Chicago Convention, there has been a decided shift against any debate. Democrat John Dingell of Michigan said today, the network coverage of the convention was so outrageous that I have to conclude it was a deliberate attempt to do mischief to my political party. But probably most important is that Humphrey and Nixon themselves are leaving the impression with the members of the committee that they do not, in fact, want a debate. In the words of one member who supports the debate, it
programs concentrating on the major candidates without giving equal time where requested to the score or more of fringe candidates running for the presidency this year. Prices declined today on the New York Stock Exchange, holding the general advance that had lasted more than a week. Volume was 11,400,000 shares. The exchange index lost 25 cents.
What's been going on in American business lately is ironic. Business keeps growing, but profits aren't keeping pace. The cost of doing business is costing business profits. And the sad fact is, a big part of this profit squeeze is happening right under your nose. Today, it costs $2.54 to get a simple business letter written and out the door. $2.54 a letter. If you have 100 people in your office, each writing just 5 letters a day, it's more than $2.54. It's more than $304,000 a year. Too much of it in mistakes. American business has to find a better way to write. During the next decade. Regards. Dictating with IBM equipment is a better way. Nearly twice as fast as a secretary taking shorthand. And with the IBM MTST, automatically turning a secretary's rough draft into a page of final copy every 2 minutes, secretaries can get those thoughts out the door, revisions included, in just about half the time. And since these two pieces of IBM equipment have increased people's productivity by as much as 50%, what you can get is part of that $300,000 back.
In Atlanta today, police arrested the Reverend Ralph Abernathy and some 80 other persons demonstrating in support of striking Negro garbage cans. Abernathy, who was freed on $25 bond on a charge of disorderly conduct, said the demonstrations would be stepped up. It was a similar strike which brought Abernathy's predecessor, Dr. Martin Luther King, to Memphis, where he was killed last April. In Oakland, California, early today, at least a dozen rifle shots crashed through the windows of the headquarters of the Black Panthers, a militant Negro group. Authorities have fired 2 white patrolmen, Richard Williams and Robert Farrell, and charged them with the shooting, an apparent outgrowth of the conviction of Panther leader Huey Newton for the manslaughter of a policeman. Some people see in this incident, and a recent attack on Black Panthers by some off-duty New York policemen, and Chicago police actions during the Democratic Convention, a growing militancy among police themselves. Tonight, in the first report of a series, we examine that phenomenon.
I think if we start to enforce the law 100%, maybe we'll start to go on the other side, because then the people will realize that the police mean business now, and you can't get away with what you got away with yesterday. And since yesterday's method, to our way of thinking, hasn't been so successful, then let's try this one.
More force.
More force. Sure.
These men are racist. They are murderers, because they've been murdering and brutalizing black people in their police stations and on the streets for years. Now the public is finally getting a view of the truth. The pigs are showing their true racist nature.
Patrolman Tyrus, what happened to you? How were you injured?
I was hit by a rack, a brick thrown from the crowd of demonstrators.
I saw policemen literally run down individuals and put their foot on them while they were down and beat them.
As many big city policemen know, the toughest part of their difficult, demanding job is keeping the peace in hostile Negro slums, at disorderly student demonstrations, and volatile anti-war rallies. In this summer of social unrest and increasingly violent confrontations, the mood of the cop on the beat in several American cities is becoming more militant. Police are demanding less restraint and tougher tactics.
The police attitude is not directed at any particular group, black or white. In Chicago, police unleashed their full fury on a crowd of abusive but generally peaceful protesters during the Democratic National Convention. They clubbed, kicked, and maced newsmen, clergymen, doctors, and innocent bystanders, as well as the predominantly white crowd of demonstrators in a display of indiscriminate force. Officially, the Chicago Police Department said such tactics were necessary to maintain law and order. Privately, some policemen said the demonstrators deserved a beating. The mayor of Chicago defended his police force.
In the heat of emotion and riot, some policemen may have overacted, but to judge the entire police department by the alleged action of a few would be just as unfair as to judge our entire younger generation by the action of this mob.
Another mayor, John Lindsay of New York, disagreed. He talked with reporters the day after the Chicago violence.
What happened last night in Chicago should sadden every American. I hope what happened there will stand as a warning to those who have perverted the meaning of law and order and made it the sole answer to our nation's problems. Every value, including freedom of the press, was sacrificed. For last night in Chicago, there was neither law, nor order, nor justice.
New York police have faced dozens of confrontations with angry demonstrators, but their orders have been to control their tempers as they control crowds with minimum force. The orders frustrate many men on the beat, leading to an incipient revolt against the leadership of the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, the 28,000-member line organization which began to demand an end to civilian control of the police and total enforcement of the law. PBA President John Cassess was forced to take a tougher line.
We're sick and tired of taking it on the chin. We're sick and tired of turning the other cheek. We've gone along with it now for 3 years, orders from them for several years, orders from City Hall, through the commissioner, the chief inspector, on down to the patrolman, to don't make any waves, don't rock the boat, and don't look for trouble. I think it's time we got the bull by the horns, and we started to enforce this law 100%, regardless of who violates it. Let's arrest them, let's bring them to trial, let the judge hear the case, and if found guilty, let the judge give out some stiff sentences, and let's keep him right in jail where he belongs.
Civil libertarians see a serious danger lurking behind the police demands. Ira Glasser, Associate Director of the New York Civil Liberties Union.
Well, of course, the policeman, the average patrolman on the beat, doesn't really know what the law is in many of the situations he's dealing with. He's not a lawyer. He probably shouldn't know what the law is. But the notion that every policeman is a law unto himself, that the policeman should not obey the orders of his superiors all the way on up to the police commissioner and the mayor, is an open invitation to anarchy.
Yet some policemen, such as Frank Schaefer of Cleveland's Fraternal Order of Police, believe there are times an order should be disobeyed.
If you look at this militarily, if a major tells a sergeant
this is the way it's going to be, and the sergeant knows the major is wrong, do you expect the sergeant to say, I'm going to do it the way I see it?
If he's any value to himself or the people he works for, he will.
It seems to me, unless you have civilian control over the police, you are getting dangerously close to the kind of situation where the law is whatever the police say it is. That is more typical of the kind of thing we're used to in totalitarian countries and have been very loath to perpetuate or to instigate in America. But it seems to be that that's what it's moving toward.
What do you call that?
You call that a police state.
One of the most dramatic differences of opinion is what to do about people who steal and set fires in a riot. Some, like Chicago Mayor Daley, have ordered police to shoot looters. Others, including the Kerner Commission on Civil Disorders, argue that shooting unarmed rioters makes a disorderly situation more violent. Attorney General Ramsey Clark.
In my judgment, looters ought to be arrested. They ought to be arrested promptly, and they ought to be presented for trial. And if they're found guilty, they ought to be put to jail. But in this country, we don't even shoot looters after they're convicted following a trial. I'm not sure we ought to try to have so fast a trial on the streets and shoot them. It is not effective law enforcement. It risks a serious escalation of disorder. We have seen this time after time around the country. I think law enforcement is fully committed to the proposition that you arrest looters. You don't shoot them.
Police leader John Cassess, while more moderate than some others, still argues that the officer on the scene must be the ultimate judge of what force is necessary to maintain law and order.
If we were restrained in our duties, and we had an atmosphere of peace, and everybody was happy, I'd say maybe this is the answer. But this isn't the answer. We're getting worse and worse and worse and worse. From 1963 to 68, it's been progressively worse. And in 69, it'll probably be even worse. And in 70, it'll be worse. So let's stop it right now. We're going to have the battleground. Let's have it here now.
There is a battleground, here and now, not only in New York, or Chicago, or Cleveland, or Watts, but in most big cities across the country. The battle over the behavior of police during demonstrations and disorders. A look at how communication helps avert violent confrontation in our next report. John Lawrence, CBS News, New York.
Stay where you are! Stay where you are!
That's the news. This is Harry Reasoner for Walter Cronkite. Good night.
On the left, Score. On the right, hair cream. Both hold your hair just as well. But let's see which mixes with water to spread more evenly through your hair. Hair cream. Score. Since you probably groom your hair with water, which would you rather use?
I had a wonderful time, Martin.
Yeah.
How about tomorrow? I'll cook you dinner.
No thanks.
The next night?
No.
Why?
What's your mouth, Brenda? After a day of smoking, eating, and drinking, you get a dragon in your mouth. I don't date dragons.
Oh.
You ought to try Vote toothpaste, Brenda. It's strong enough to kill the dragon and clean and brighten your pretty little teeth.
Oh, I'm so happy you told me, Martin. Kiss me?
First the vote, then we kiss. Vote toothpaste, the dragon killer.
Direct from our newsroom in New York, this has been the CBS Evening News with Harry Reasoner, substituting for Walter Cronkite.